Well, I suppose in part this is a novel about reading. I'm sure anyone in this room will know there is a distinct difference between reading a novel and reading a novel by someone you know. And maybe this is what drives literary festivals. We build a version of a voice, and then even in 10 minutes, that voice changes for us, and perhaps forevermore. Writers that I admire and I go to listen to, forevermore, when I read one of their books, it's their voice I will hear now, not just this neutral sound. So there's a value, I think, in this. But reading people is also something we do. If you meet a stranger, automatically you're judging or gauging his or her intentions. Small clues, tones of voice, body language, the message itself. You're reading that almost instinctively, I think. Probably hardwired into us. We know the names of various mental illnesses where people are not able to do this. Because not only are we reading people, but we're reading their reading of us. And that recursiveness also is automatic. And my view of the novel in general is that it's actually a rarefied form of what we all do all the time, reading each other. So that the novel is a perfect engine, I think, for analyzing the way in which we read each other. And a spy novel inevitably is about how to read situations, how to read people, how to gauge ahead, how to take charge of the narrative too. So yes, always a bit intimidating or interesting or horribly fascinating to meet a writer whose work you know. You feel you know too many things about them, and actually you know nothing.
I'm so relieved to hear that. I think when you say it's a novel about reading, you've already skipped to one of my questions, and I think when you set out to do a novel like Sweet Tooth, is that a thing that is in your mind, or does it start elsewhere?
Well, every novel starts differently. Sweet Tooth began with my interest in the fact that the CIA and other intelligence agencies during the Cold War, right from the late 40s onwards, started to infiltrate the world of the arts. The CIA spent hundreds of millions of dollars, exhibitions of abstract expressionism. They funded a festival of atonal music in Paris. They also funded publishing houses of a certain kind of persuasion. Always through cultural front organizations like the Congress for Cultural Freedom. And the general purpose was to persuade left-of-center European intellectuals mostly that the West was best. And in many ways it was not dishonorable. These were celebrations of values of freedom of expression, of openness, of freedom of assembly, and it was against the totalitarian spirit. But the crazy thing was, it was done in secret. I mean, all of these things could have been funded by an arts council, by the government. So there was a paradox, and this, when I started reading about it, this was what drew me in. I thought, what if you had someone offering a young writer some money, posing as some kind of cultural organization, but what if that novelist came to know what that young woman was about, and what if he started to spy on her? Then maybe I'd write the novel to sort of find out in a way what would happen if the arts have their revenge on the intelligence services.
But now you say revenge, and I can understand that, because of course the minute you say the CIA, everything sort of goes up like this. But it was a kind of a Marshall help for the arts.
Oh, absolutely. And the CIA were full of university professors. These were not stupid people. It's interesting that when the witch hunts of the McCarthy era began, many CIA officers lost their job because they had spent all their time in the company of the very people who were the most eloquent opponents of totalitarian thought, and these were socialists, democratic socialists. These were the ones who knew the most, and many of them were ex-communists. These were the eloquent voices that the CIA wanted to bring onto their side against the Soviet Union. But from the point of view of those socialists, they had their own views. I mean, so there is a question of who was using who. Okay, so suddenly a down-at-heel novelist finds himself flying first class to Berlin for a conference. Fine. But then, of course, there was a lot of fury, and it was correct. There was something polluting about this money. Nobody knew its source, and often writers, journalists, composers, and artists were shocked to discover that they had in some way indirectly been funded by a governmental organization like the CIA. So, why did it happen, though? Why not just give the money to the National Endowment of the Arts and send it out that way? And this is something, again, that Sweet Tooth is interested in. Organizations love to get bigger. The more successful an organization is, it's just a sort of it's human nature. People want it to get bigger. And my message to Louisiana is contained in this.
I knew you would say this.
Do not get bigger, because as you get bigger, you will lose that thing, that little mojo that makes it magical. Many literary festivals, and I'm thinking of Hay, which is magnificent in its way, but it's got bigger and bigger and bigger, till basically it's a festival of celebrity, not simply of literature. Intelligence organizations love to get bigger. The CIA was lavishly funded all the way through the Cold War, could not resist, once it had started these projects, doing them, and of course the cult of secrecy is its own sweet reward. And so we ended up with this mad paradox.
I was thinking that the MI5 has something, and I suppose also the CIA, all intelligence, have something novelistic about them in themselves, because there's so much that you have to try and imagine and invent and set going, and Serena is a character. She is, of course, a character in your novel, but in the MI5 she's also a character, because she lives in a system where nobody really knows where everybody is from and who they really are. It's a kind of a fiction in itself.
You could take that one step further and say that all novels are spy novels.
Yeah.
And you could go even further and say that all people are spies.
Actually, you've called literature or the novel a higher form of gossip.
Yeah, it was also a higher form of spying, or maybe a lower form of spying. We could not live as social animals if we told each other absolutely everything about ourselves. We would drive each other crazy. Only in America do people tell you everything about themselves. So there's one exception. We need secrets. Of course we need secrets. A love affair is of itself a secret thing. Even going to the lavatory is going to be a secret thing. Who before Joyce ever went there? We, of course, have many facets, and we reveal them in different situations and in different registers. And again, I think the spy novel, coming back up the chain of everything being spying, the spy novel has a number of wonderful conventions, and one of the interests, I think, for a mainstream novelist to go into a genre is to play with the form itself. The form looks at you in the face, and you need to have fun. I was talking about this with Zadie Smith, who's contemplating a science fiction novel, which I think is very brave, but also extremely interesting. I would love to read a Zadie Smith science fiction novel. As soon as you enter into the world of the spy novel, there are these automatic rules. Of course, the spy must fall in love with someone. Of course, there have to be secrets between them that are only slowly revealed. And all the business of the spy novel, from the novelist's point of view, is about withholding information. So inevitably, the role of the novelist begins to look like the role of the spy master. You can't dissociate them. The biggest interest in the intelligence organization in any situation is who controls the narrative. That then becomes a matter of supreme interest to me in this novel, of playing the game of who is in charge of the story. Who do you trust? Who do you believe? And of course, you're not going to believe the novelist. So that's the first game you need to play.
And what you have to tell things that we're not actually supposed to know somehow to get the story
I got
going.
tired of not telling that. But what do you think? I know I'm easy on it.
But I think that when you have to do a spy novel, and you say you wrestle with the genre, what is it that you do? How do you do that? Do you always read spy novels to relax, or have you never really been interested in spy novels? Or
I don't have a great passion for them. I love the novels of Le Carré. And he is rather grumpily insisted that he's not really a spy novelist, he's a novelist, and I think he's right. I think when the literary histories are written, the literary history of Britain, nothing will have charted its shifts and changes in the post-war era than Le Carré's novels. And I think we will be less interested in calling them spy novels and just see them as novels of office life, for one. And most people now live in offices. And as a chronicler of especially the anxieties in the post-war years of British decline. It was a very powerful motif, not only in society but in its literature, of how it came to be that we had won a war, we had impoverished ourselves, and as the 60s and 70s went on, how was it that our enemies, our previous enemies, Germany, Japan, were flourishing, becoming richer, while we were sort of sinking further and further into all kinds of political conundrums we didn't know how to solve. Le Carré really catches that exceptionally well. I went and had lunch with him while I was writing this book. He was very witty and generous. He belongs to a generation that actually worked for MI5. He worked in both 5 and 6. And I should explain, by the way, MI5 is our domestic agency and MI6 is foreign intelligence. So he worked in both. And actually, there was one story he told me, afterwards, after lunch, I wrote everything down that he'd said of interest, which was a lot. But there was one thing in particular I really liked, and I put it into my novel. But before going any further, I then sent him the relevant page and said, "Can I have this? I mean, or maybe you're planning to use it yourself, or this is my real fear, you already have used it, and I haven't read it." And it was a very simple thing. He said, when you're working in intelligence agencies, all your colleagues, you have no idea whether they are complete idiots or geniuses.
That's fantastic.
Because you never know what they're doing. You never know if they're just pretending to be more stupid than they are.
Or vice versa.
Or that they really are incredibly stupid. And the other thing is that they often will disappear out of your life. They're sent somewhere and you don't know where they've gone. You don't know whether they've been promoted, demoted, or sacked. And I thought, I just love that idea. This could be surrounded by geniuses and fools and not know which is which. So he very nicely wrote and said, "No, I've never used that, but my dear boy," actually he didn't say my dear boy, I sort of felt him. I felt him say that. "You're very welcome to have it."
This sounds like a really nice kind of research, but there were things that you did not have to research at all, because you have reused some of your own writing in this novel.
Yeah. The 70s, so I was 22 in 1970, and although, as I've said, this was a decade here, I don't know, how was it in Denmark in the 70s?
Horrible.
Horrible.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm really pleased to hear that. Well, we shared this horribleness with you. We had, during the Edward Heath administration, 1970 to 74, we had 5 states of emergency. They were all related to issues of energy security. We had highly politicized trade unions. We had a very, very strange, embedded right wing who always seemed on the edge of a coup, or at least in the left-wing imagination. And we were going begging bowl in hand to the International Monetary Fund, and our industry was hopeless. We thought that everything about us was absolutely hopeless. But I and everyone I knew was having the time of their lives. And actually, in some ways, the 60s never really got going, it seemed to me, till the 70s. The 70s were, remember, these summers of loves and so on actually started when the decade was almost over, 67, 68. And I think artistically, in Great Britain, and especially in the big cities, music and art and to some extent literature was very, very lively indeed. So there was a kind of aporia, so a real break between what I privately remembered of being 22 with my first stories being published, meeting the writer friends who had become and still are lifetime friends, being young and free, having very little money, but you didn't need much money. I don't know how it was in Denmark, but you could rent a very nice flat. Well, no, a very horrible flat.
Yeah. But it was nice to have one.
It was nice to have one, but it would cost £3 a week, £2 a week for some terrible place. But it was still, a place. Just needed a lick of paint. And life was fun and glorious, just to be young and to feel that something was about to break open in terms of one's own work, and then meeting other writers who were the same age, always themselves on the edge of publishing their first books. So I decided, in order to bring back that time for me, not only talk of our states of emergency, but to pull out my own old stories, as it were, from out of the desk, tinker with them a little, and then feed them back into...
Tinker, that's such a John le Carré word, isn't it?
Tinker Tailor, yes. Yes, I think it probably has the same root, but very different. And I made up a few along the way just to prove to myself I could still do it.
Because you wrote differently in the 70s, or?
I think my interests were different, or in the 70s they were certainly narrower. And I set myself some curious existential rules for writing, which now I think I'd regard them as very claustrophobic. But I thought it was cheating ever to tell the reader what anybody thought. I thought I could allow myself to do is describe what they said and what they did. And then also describe physical details or bodily details to create an atmosphere of thought, but not the thought itself. And I rather wrote myself into a corner with this kind of approach, as inevitably. But who was I reading? Peter Handke, I remember reading a lot. Kafka impressed me a great deal. Kafka had something of that existential quality, but he also had great humor.
And you didn't?
I hoped I did, but I thought I did, but many disagreed. But that was to miss out on, some of the great inventions, as it were, in novel writing. And we were talking about this yesterday. It's not the case, I think, that the arts don't improve. I think novelists, rather like scientists, stand on the shoulders of giants in Newton's famous formulation. And by the way, the interesting variation on Newton's formulation is the reason I haven't been able to see very far is because of all the giants standing on my shoulders. But we have certain tools at our command, free and direct style, developed for us by Jane Austen and Flaubert. All the experiments that Joyce made in describing the flow of consciousness, which we now take entirely for granted, and Virginia Woolf's perpetuation of those experiments, we've now taken into our bloodstream. We couldn't have invented it for ourselves. We might have waited for someone else to come along and do it for us. So the representation of states of mind seems to me absolutely central now to writing, whereas at the age of 25 I thought it was bankrupt, it was finished, it was over, you could no longer do this. So that I think would be the major change for me then.
And here's Serena, the main character, who's very beautiful. That's one of the nicest things.
You can't have ugly heroines in a spy novel. It's verboten.
But I think it's perhaps the most characteristic thing about her, that she is so pretty. That's at least one thing that really lingers on. Because in many other respects, if I may, she seems rather annoying. She seems annoying in the sense that you keep on thinking, but Serena, please think. What are you doing?
Well, what would you do? She has a nice affair with an older man. Would you not have done that?
Oh yes, I'm not talking about that affair.
Okay.
I mean,
Did you do nothing stupid when you were 22?
I did a few things. Perhaps do we have to talk about that here? I have actually a great deal of friends in this room who may want to spy on that.
They know where you're coming from.
Yes, they do. So no, but I was just wondering. I mean, she seems in one sense ambitious, and then in another sense too unrealistic. It's like she's all the time almost slipping into a form of, who am I really in all this?
I don't recognize this at all. You read this one?
Oh my God, is that...
I think she's about as clever as me, so I'm a bit worried.
Shall I quote this again?
I think she's a pretty cunning sort of girl. I mean, wouldn't you be frustrated if you joined MI5 and then you found that your first mission is to go and clean a safe house, as many young women were?
But she takes that nicely.
She takes it better than her chum. Or than her chum pretends to take it.
Than her smarter chum.
Yeah, a much smarter chum. Even smarter than me. No, I don't quite recognize the story of her passivity or...
No, I wouldn't call...
I mean, she's got a few negative attributes. And in fact, right at the end, Tom Haley lists these for us. And so what he says... can I find the page? Probably not. I should have marked it before I started talking to you about this.
You were not aware of this possible attack on Serena.
Yeah. Anyway, what Tom says is, I have to inhabit you, as it were, and your unsisterliness, your anxiety to impress your superiors, your little moments of snobbery. And then he says, against that, I have to put against it your lovely sense of fun, your high intelligence, your love of sex, etc. So she's a rounded person, I would have thought. Anyway, who am I to say?
You only wrote it. No, I'm being too harsh on Serena, but it can be frustrating, and I suppose it's part of the trick to know that she's going the wrong way. I mean, you really want to have a romantic story with her and Tom Haley, because obviously they're having a real good time together. Oh. And for every day that she spends with him, or even without him, without telling him that she's actually spying on him, she's making it more and more impossible to have this romantic end that she so loves in literature.
But it's a real difficulty, isn't it? If you go into a relationship pretending to be someone else, or lying through your teeth from the very beginning, and then you realize you've fallen in love, and then you want to come clean, you know that coming clean means the end of the affair. So it's a trap. It's a reasonable thing to just be stuck in this trap, not know how to get out of it. You look skeptical.
No, I'm not skeptical at all. I'm all yours. I'm just trying to put my own feelings straight with this relationship, and perhaps with the relationship of literature, because these are two people that discuss literature.
Yes, Serena is a reader. She's a speed reader. She can chomp through a novel in an afternoon. She's what every novelist dread.
There you go.
She can read a novel like someone looking something up in a dictionary. She can drive people in the room mad because she snaps the page over every few seconds. She's also a naive reader in that she's not interested in narrative tricks. She doesn't like Borges, she doesn't like Tom Pynchon or John Barth or any of the great tricksters of our times.
And when you say tricksters, what exactly do you mean?
People who are playing the kind of tricks I play in this book. Where the narrative frame comes under question, or things are not rhetorically what you think they were when you started. She also loves to read, the book she loves most to read, and I think this is a kind of an affliction of modern reading, by the way. She really wants to read about herself. She really wants to find someone who gives her back herself. And some of the great bestsellers of our time, I think, are books that somehow manage to do this. She also loves a novel to end with someone saying, "Marry me." Again, this is what she gets. And her lover, Tom Haley, is another kind of reader. He loves Pynchon and Barth and Cortázar and all the tricksters. He's a bit dismissive of Serena's tastes. They cannot find common ground. She says, I don't like novels with tricks. I want a novel to show me the real world, the world that I'm in, right on the page. And he says, reasonably enough to her, you can't have realism. You can't make the world on the page without a trick. I mean, realism is a trick. So, Sweet Tooth is a novel that Serena, I hope, would love, and Tom Haley would love. This is the novel in which I try to unify the taste for a story, a yarn, a love affair that's not quite predictable in its course, and a gigantic trick. And I would hope that if I were to send it to either of them, they would both say, this is my kind of novel.
There is a wonderful scene between the two, because it's also about love, and we've also talked about love, but when you say that they have problems making ends meet in literature because she loves this and he loves that, there's a certain poet he wants her to read, and she reads him, and the same way, like this, and he says, what's in the poem?
Yeah.
And the most annoying thing is that she says to the letter, what's in there? I mean, she can completely repeat it, but of course she hasn't kind of understood it.
Yes, the poem is probably the most famous poem, one of 10,000 famous poems in the English language, by Edward Thomas, called Adelstrop. And the reason I chose it, it's only 3 little simple quatrains, and it's just the account of someone being on a train. It stops unaccountably. Someone gets off. He looks out the window. He sees the sign, Adelstrop. And that's it. There's really nothing more to it. And yet, it catches something so beautiful. It is the most intense, still poem. And Tom takes Serena on their first date to the basement of a second-hand bookshop because he's amazed. She's never read any poetry in her life. She's read thousands of novels. And he puts this poem in her hands and, as you say, asks her to read it. Her command of it is total in terms of recall, but her understanding of it is absolutely zero. And at that point, they kiss.
But I mean, that's beautiful. He forgives her for not understanding the poem that he really wants to.
Well, there's nothing to forgive. You can't blame someone for not understanding something.
If you're a writer?
No. No, it's not a matter of forgiving, I don't think. It's a matter of beginning the love affair and the slow process by which they merge their worldviews. I mean, there comes a point, reciprocal point, just to show that Serena's no dunce. Serena's a mathematician. And he says at one point, challengingly in a restaurant, well, you know, I've told you lots about literature and how to read poems. And tell me something about mathematics. Surprise me. Tell me something counterintuitive. And she thinks for a minute, and then she sets before him a simple problem of probability. It's called the Monty Hall problem. I don't know if you know it, but it's about a game show. You go on stage in the game show, and there are 3 boxes. In one of the boxes, your prize. The other 2 are empty. The game show host knows which box the prize is in. You choose a box. You choose box 1, let's say. The boxes are still not open. The game show host then chooses another box. He then gives you the opportunity of changing boxes to the other box. Now, Serena says to Tom, should you stay where you are, or should you open the other box? And he says, like lots of people would say, well, it's 1 in 3, it was in there, it's going to be 1 in 3, it's in the other boxes. Absolutely the same. But no, in fact, the logic is quite clear to Serena, but not to him, that if he moves to the other box, he doubles the chance of finding the prize. Anyway, look it up. There's a very good entry on Wikipedia, actually.
How many of you would have
Any mathematicians
in
the audience? Where are the mathematicians of Denmark?
There's one there.
Oh, good. Phew. Yeah,
you
good,
knew it.
Good.
Okay.
Well, anyway, to Serena's amazement and great pleasure, he just cannot get it. He cannot get it. He absolutely cannot get it. And to her, it's, as it is, I have to say, to me, blindingly obvious that you have to move your box. So he then tries to write a story incorporating, because he thinks in the middle of the night, he wakes up and says, I get it. And he writes a story about a man who's trailing his wife who's having an affair, and he follows her up the stairs of a hotel, and they arrive on a landing, and there are 3 hotel room doors. But he hasn't got there fast enough to see which door they've gone in. He sends it to Serena, and she realizes he's got it completely wrong. He's not meeting the conditions of the Monty Hall problem, so she has to rewrite it for him. So, does she forgive him? No, it's not a matter of forgiveness, you see. It's just a matter of different kinds of knowing. And I thought it horrifies me when women readers say to me, she's too much like a man, understanding all this logic. I thought, oh God, how dare you say this? How dare you say this? We have a mathematician in our family who happens to be a woman. We think of her as in our family anyway.
But it's also a time where women and their status, at least in the MI5, is really precarious. Or rather, they get to do the most boring things. Yeah. In that context, you would say that Serena's job is quite interesting, but it's still a low down thing in the system.
Very low down. Women were not allowed to rise above the level of clerical officer grade 1 or something, which was really right at the bottom. In 1972, they were not allowed to run agents. That was because that was the thing you did to start your career. Until November 1972, there was something called the Women's Revolt. The women graduates, and they were often people with incredibly good degrees, fabulous education, often from quite privileged backgrounds too, started meeting after hours to discuss how they would form a pressure group. So this was exactly the same time as the second wave of the women's movement was getting going. So it obviously drew a great deal from that. What's interesting, if you read the unofficial history of MI5, it's now clear that all those women's meetings were bugged, which I thought was wonderful. I'd love to hear, And in fact, the person who broke through was a woman called Stella Rimington, and who was one of the first she was the first to run an agent. And then she became, when she retired, the chair of the Booker Prize. Just as is predicted in Sweet Tooth, when they say, if we cultivate a writer like this, we'd probably be able one of these days to get one of our own people into the Booker Prize committee. And who knows, we'll have big success on our hands.
It's really a novel that keeps you glued to the pages, and it almost drives you crazy because there are really a lot of tricks in this novel. Did you have fun writing this?
I did, actually. Writers won't confess this very easily, but there are days when you sort of chortle to yourself. When you think, yeah, that would be fun. And you're bursting to tell someone, but it's such a bad idea to do that. Because it hollows itself out very quickly. I did have a lot of fun. It wasn't a lot of research, actually, a bit of social history to remind myself of stuff. So mostly it was sort of self-generating. And it was a relief, actually. I do quite a lot of research for novels, and then it was a relief not to be researching too much. And to simply enter into this field, as it were, of espionage and literature. Because, as I said, my first attraction to all this was the cultural Cold War and this penetration of the arts by the intelligence services. Once that field was before me, it seemed to offer endless possibilities of playfulness with form. So yes, I probably had more pleasure for this than I have for quite a while.
And this thing about making a writer one of the main characters, is that especially challenging, or especially wonderful, or especially just like all the other characters? I mean, you must know... I think readers are correct to be a bit suspicious of all these writers who keep popping up in novels. And the modernist novel in particular seems curiously absent of the one great subject that should fascinate us all, which is work. In the sort of existential modernist novel, no one works. Of course not. They have so many things to
now, why
think
is that?
about.
It's because novelists don't work, you see, and they don't know anything about it. And you long for those writers like Conrad, who knew all about how to sail a ship, or Kipling, who knew about mechanical engineers and soldiers, and Dickens, who knew all about the law courts and Parliament and how things work. So writers who went for what Martin Amis and I used to call staring at the wall novels. And we devised a plot for the staring at the wall novel and the archetype of this. And actually, I hope there are no Germans present. German literature was so subsidized during the 70s and 80s that it had a lot of staring at the wall novels because nobody had to buy them. So your hero, whom you mustn't name, maybe an initial at most, M, let's say, checks into a hotel without a name in a town that is not named and sits on the edge of his bed waiting for the telephone to ring from someone he doesn't know. He doesn't know why they're going to ring. And while he waits, he stares at the wall. And that is your sort of existential, highly subsidized novel, which no reader wants to approach. But that's just to say, in kind of exaggerated terms, why work has vanished from the novel, because the business of letters has become professionalized, and it's not that you could be working in the customs house in the day and be Melville by night, or Chaucer, who also worked in the customs house. You are a novelist, and that's what you do. So when you want someone in your novel, it better be a novelist or a writer. And it's also very useful in a novel to move the plot forward. You don't want someone who has to be somewhere at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. It's very inconvenient. You want someone who's available to you night and day to go anywhere you want, and only freelance writers can do that.
Actually, Tom Haley is a bit sour about the job at the university.
Yeah.
Being not only a job, but also Sussex University, which is not as fine as Cambridge. Although you went there,
wait
right?
a minute. Excuse me. It's Serena who thinks that Sussex is just some terrible holiday camp. And at the end of the novel, Tom delivers a very fierce defense of, not more than a defense, a celebration. And he tells Serena that Serena, who'd hated, by the way, doing maths at Cambridge, she wasn't much good at maths, even though far better than anyone else around her. Tom said to her, you would have done other things as well. That you wouldn't have just had a survey course in mathematics. You would have been forced to do a bit of philosophy and learn some French and understand something about literature. So he does make the case for my alma mater, and I'm very pleased that he shares my views on this.
There is actually a Tom writing in Sussex University that you met, isn't that right?
This is a weird thing. I mean, I have no religion, but this almost
did it for you.
Test my atheism to the extreme. When I handed in this novel, Tom's name was Tom Healy, Healy, and he was a specialist in the poetry of Edmund Spenser and English Renaissance poetry generally. And just as the novel was about to go to press, one of the editors at Random House phoned and said, "We've just discovered that there's an English professor at the University of Sussex called Tom Healy, who's a specialist in Spenser." And I said, and they said, "Well, should we delay publication and send the novel to him?" And I said, I know for a start it's early June. He'll be marking finals if he's a professor. We might not get him to read it for ages. So I will change it. So I changed it to Haley. Same number of letters so that we could keep the typeface, everything. And then, 2 months later, my University of Sussex, turned 50 years old, and they awarded me a gold medal. And would I go to a special dinner to receive it? So I went with Annalena, my wife, and we went down to Sussex, and there was a drinks reception. And there was Tom Healy. And we met, and I said, "Oh my God, you've just fallen out of my novel." And I explained the whole story to him, and he said, "Oh God, I would have loved to be in Tom Healy." And then I said, "Well, I'm sorry, I've got to leave you now because I'm being awarded a gold medal." And he said, "Yes, I know, because I'm awarding it to you." And so I stood on stage, and Tom Healy pronounced this peroration on all my works minus this one, because he hadn't read it. And it was the most extraordinary thing.
Life is pretty extraordinary.
It is stranger than fiction, as Shakespeare rightly said.
stranger than fiction, and even in this fiction where you have put in actual people. So now, you know, at the end of the day, the head goes spinning because...
Well, I had to build a literary milieu for Tom Haley, and it seemed crazy not to give him the one that I remembered so fondly. A lot of us grouped around a magazine called The New Review, which was published out of Greek Street. And so, yes, I gave him my editor at Cape. I mean, people often ask, loads of novelists will always ask me, do you put people in novels? Well, I don't, but I thought if I'm going to do this, I'll actually call them by their names. You know, and in the case of Tom Mashler, who's probably the most described character in this, I sent him the pages, thinking he's going to hate this, you know, the way he's described it. And he wrote back to, "Oh, I love it." So I was very relieved about that.
I'm getting the idea that people really want to be in your novels. Have they become nicer with time?
People want to be in my novels.
Yes. I mean, Tom Healy wanted to be in the novel. Mashler was pleased to see himself in the novel.
Well, they better form a queue. I don't know. I'm not sure I'd want to be in my novels.
I'm not sure you're not in your novels, but that's a different thing. It's time to round up. Thank you so much for coming. Please come back. If we keep the festival small,
yes,
come back some other time. And,
just big enough for me.
Just big enough for you. Not a celebrity at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.